Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when and where you are. I've said that a few times, and I will say it a few more times. Welcome to another session of Festival in the Box 2.0. Lovely to have you with us. This session is for the Glen 12 years old. And once again, we have David Miles, one of the whiskey specialists with Edrington Suntory, and he's going to come on and talk to us about the bottling and Glen. Good morning, David, as it is with us.
Good morning, Eddie. How are you? It's lovely to see your happy, smiling face again.
I'm very well, thank you. Very well indeed. Looking forward to tasting some Glen with your good self. Now, listen, you already very kindly told us all about yourself and how you got to be doing what you're doing in the Bamor video. So if anyone wants to listen to how David got to be doing what he's doing and what he does, please go and watch that video. But essentially, David is one of the whiskey specialists, a whiskey ambassador, essentially, for Edrington Suntory. Isn't that right, David?
It is. Yep. I'm truly one of the lucky ones. I get to do a job that I love doing and look at the whiskies that we've got in the portfolio. Even what we're talking about today, Bamor and Glen. That'll keep me pretty happy, certainly for the rest of the morning.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure you do more than just look at them, David.
Well, it's possible, yes. I feel an integral part of my job is to be able to look people in the eye and tell them that yes, I have actually tasted the liquid in the glass as well. So.
Exactly. You wouldn't last long if you didn't. Anyway, listen, could you? I'm sure the guys and gals at home would love to get started on the tasting element. So if you can maybe introduce the bottling and tell us all about it, and perhaps introduce some of the flavors that we should expect.
Absolutely. So it is Glen. So Glen Garioch, as it says on the label, pronounced Glen. This is a Highland whiskey. It comes from virtually the east coast of Scotland. Every distillery makes a claim about it's the most this, it's the oldest that. Glen is the easternmost distillery in Scotland. In the greater picture, that makes no difference at all to the liquid, to the quality of the liquid. There's all sorts of other influences at play. But what does matter a little about the location, in the breadbasket of Aberdeenshire, where it's part of a very fertile area of Scotland. So traditionally, the barley that's been available has always been really great quality. And Glengarry's a very small distillery, but they've take a lot of pride in their craft, in the skill with which they produce the liquid. They have quietly been getting on with it for a good couple of 100 years. But there are some really exciting developments happening now, which we will get onto in a little bit. But I was ignoring Eddie's rejoinder there that we should get some whiskey into the glass. So this is the Glen 12-year-old that we have here. Glen have a number of different expressions, a combination of a few age statements, not that many, a few non-age statements, and a few vintages. So they like to select a bottling that will really express part of what the distillery does. Again, I think this is slightly unusual. Every bottling is at least 48% ABV. So the Founder's Reserve, the Virgin Oak, which, if you, for want of a better phrase, that's slightly dismissive. The entry-level whiskies are no such thing. They have that extra heft to them. All of the whiskey produced at the distillery is non-chill filtered. 12-year-old is a combination of both bourbon and sherry cask. So please get your nose into the glass. Lovely almost a slightly banana fruit note coming through on this. That sort of vanilla-y sweetness. Oh, it's, I don't know, pine note, maybe something going on there. It's a.
I always get a kind of meatiness from Glengarry, sort of like deli counter.
Yeah, it's a whiskey with body to it, isn't it? It's Put
a little bit of water in mine.
I'm a man who is happy to follow where you lead in these matters.
It's funny because we do quite a lot of work with the Founders Reserve, and I always find that it takes quite a lot of water to get it to the point where I'm absolutely, find it to be at its optimum.
Yeah. Well, even just adding that splash there so now, I'm looking at the tasting notes on the package, and they're talking about the pear, and that little splash of water I've just added, for me, that has sort of revealed that sort of orchard fruit note that I was hunting for earlier. And the little splash of water has really allowed that to express itself there.
Yes, it's definitely brought out the fruit, the pear drops, as you say, maybe some pineapple chunks.
Ooh,
very nice indeed. Could you perhaps, whilst we're enjoying the dram, tell us a little bit more of the history of the distillery and the because again, it's an old distillery. It goes back a long way.
It does. We're right back to 1797 or so, and so in many ways, a distillery that reflects the ups and downs of the Scottish whisky industry over the years, in particular in the latter part of the 20th century. It is a distillery that has been mothballed and closed down for years, and then has been bought or taken over, has relaunched, seems to be doing great things, gets mothballed again as the demand goes up and down over the years. So it is a distillery that has produced very different styles of whiskey over the years as well. So it was last mothballed in 1995 for 2 years, and then reopened in 1997. Up until 1995, Glengarry produced a peated whiskey. And back then it had its own floor maltings. And so if you find an old Glengarry, and there are 1 or 2 vintages, there is a 1994 or 5, I believe. There's a 78 still available. That would be a peated Glengarry. So there is interesting developments in Glengarry. When it reopened, having been mothballed in 97, we were using unpeated barley. So that has been what the distillery has been producing since then. Back in the 70s, one of the first things that Glengarry introduced back then, which they introduced like a new sort of heat recycling system, but a lot of the excess heat that was being produced back then went to providing the heat for the greenhouses that were then attached to the distillery. And there is a generation of whiskey drinkers, if you like, who one of the things they associate with Glengarry is tomatoes. Is the fact that we were producing tons of tomatoes and red peppers and cucumbers in Aberdeenshire, because the heat from the distillery was being recycled there. That unfortunately doesn't happen anymore, but there are some other now really interesting developments at Glengarry in how we are using the waste heat, how we are recycling everything, talking about sustainability as we move on through the conversation. Glengarry are doing some really interesting things, but the whiskey that the distillery is producing, because actually we don't produce that much, pretty much everything, which is my way of saying everything, but I don't want to commit myself totally to it, does just go into the single malts. At the moment, we don't provide liquid for blending, so we are dependent on making sure that everything we produce is as good as possible, because there is no hiding place. If we're producing it, it's going into a Glengarry bottling. So the 12-year-old, this has got that gorgeous fruitiness to it. It is an unpeated whiskey, so we're allowing that fruit to really express itself. Just putting my nose back into the glass there, even after a few minutes. That pear, the estery pear drop note, really beautiful. Sweetness still coming through underneath that.
Yeah, I think I definitely recommend the experiment with the water, because it really does
absolutely
emphasize that fruitiness.
Yeah, and for the last few years, I've lent more and more towards, generally speaking, not adding water, and I'm really pleased that I've added some water to this. Eddie, more people should listen to what you say, because you talk sense.
Well, it's just through bitter or sweet experience, David. Experimentation. So tell me, I know you've alluded to the future plans for the distillery prior to this chat, and so I'd really like to focus on that, if we may, because I think it sounds like there's some really exciting developments to come. So if you'd like to tell us what's in the pipeline as much as you can, and then we can discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are exciting developments at the Glengarry Distillery at the moment. Beam Suntory, who are the owners, have invested more than £6 million recently in, if I say updating the distillery, it's actually to downplay the changes that are being made. So in some ways, I guess possibly the most exciting thing that is going to happen, there's been one or two hiccups and holdups over the last year, but it is just about to happen. We are reopening the floor maltings at Glengarry. It is going to go back to being able to malt its own barley. This is, I think, a really exciting development. I'm going to need you to correct my figures here, Eddie, but I'm guessing that will make us the 8th, maybe 9th distillery in Scotland that have their own floor maltings. So to some degree, we are going back to what we were, but even they could and should possibly be reopening later this year, if not at the beginning of 2022. They're still not quite sure whether we are actually going to be peating our own barley at the maltings. Since they were last used, there's been a lot of housing built very close to the distillery. The distillery is in Old Meldrum, this small, rather beautiful, picturesque market town. The housing is now all around the distillery. So if we were to actually peat the barley there, it would not be hugely popular with our new neighbours. And obviously we do not want to upset anybody. So maybe we will just be malting the barley. And when we are going to produce a peated Geary, we will be buying that in. one possibility. The other possibility that is being looked at is the installation of sort of air cleaning technology, air scrubbing in the pagoda towers, so that we would extract the smoke before it's released, so that it doesn't influence the atmosphere around there. But it's really exciting because the possibilities are all there, and reopening the maltings and possibly just doing unpeated malted barley, I think could be really interesting. It'd be really great to see what happens there. And if we do find a way that's cost effective to do our own peated barley as well, that too, it will just give us that element of control. It will give us the ability to experiment, to be that little freer. And I would almost like draw a parallel, a comparison with Bowmore. The influence of the barley that they malt themselves is so integral to the overall Bowmore character. And this, I think, is something that can really happen with Glen Geary too. So this is really exciting times for Glen Geary. We're reopening the floor maltings.
Well, that's fantastic news, and it's kind of a testament to where whiskey is at the moment, with obviously new distilleries cropping up all over the place, not just in Scotland, but also distillers, big and small, looking at how things were done in the past, and perhaps re-engaging historic processes like malting, floor malting. Now, obviously, Glen Geary is a much smaller output than something like Bowmore or Lefroy.
Yeah.
I think it's about 1 million litres. Is that right?
It's about that. If you like, the other figure I can quote at you is that we use about 72 tons of malt a week, which is a pretty minor figure in the greater scheme of things. Yeah.
I mean, 1 million litres of alcohol sounds like a lot to most people, but just to put that into focus, something like Glenlivet, Glenfiddich, they're running close to, if not more than 20 million litres. So it's pretty small fry in terms of Scotch single malt distillery.
I know. Absolutely. I mean, we've got basically two stills. We've got a wash still and a spirit still.
Yes. So my question was, given that the lower output, is it an aim, is it an ambition for all of the spirit produced at Glen Geary to be produced from its own floor malted barley?
No, unfortunately not, because even with that relatively small production of volume of alcohol, we are still very constrained by the size of the floor maltings that we have there. So actually, it's going to be a very similar sort of figure to Bowmore. 25%, 25 to 30% of all the barley that we use, we will be doing ourselves. But we don't have the capacity to increase that. And the housing has come towards us, so unfortunately we can't expand the maltings the other way. But that's still a big enough percentage of all the barley to matter for us to be able to control the flavour of what we are producing here. So it is going to be very influential and therefore very exciting what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, well, regardless, it's very exciting, and it's still a significant percentage.
Yeah.
I did wonder, because 1 million litres is still a lot.
Yeah.
And certainly a lot to floor malt.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, we cannot do that. But I'm biting my tongue because I want to tell you the next exciting thing that is part of all these renovations and that are going on at the distillery, and it ties in really nicely with what you just mentioned earlier about looking back at how things were done. So Eddie, the next thing I want to talk to you about, we are changing how we heat our wash still. And we are going, I'm going to say going back to, but going forward to having a direct fired wash still.
Wow.
So, so for anyone who's listening, where we are going a bit too far down the whiskey geekery route here, please forgive us. But most distilleries in Scotland at the moment use indirect heat, steam coils to heat their stills. 40, 50, 60 years ago, everyone was basically using direct heat. They were applying gas fires to the stills. Now, the big disadvantage of this is obviously you've got naked flames and a lot of alcohol around, which is a somewhat risky combination. Also, you have issues with being able to control the temperature. Using direct fired stills is a part of malt whiskey's past, and it has it was superseded for some very good reasons. We're going back to it, and so it's only going to be the wash still that is going to be direct heated, and we can do this now because the advances in safety technology are there. We are not running the risk of burning the distillery down or blowing up old Meldrum. It, fingers crossed, will not happen. But what it does mean for the wash still, if you are using direct heat, if you're using steam heat, basically you can get a temperature 130, 140 degrees Celsius there. In the greater scheme of things, that's a very gentle heat to be applying to the wash. So as you heat the wash up, you get your, your vapors, your alcohol splitting off, rising up to the condenser. It's very controlled and it's safe, and we know exactly what's happening. But the wash itself, the wort, now there's still a fair amount of sugars still left in that were not fermented for one reason or the other. You've still got a lot of the yeast, even though dead yeast cells there, but they will have a lot of flavors there. There's going a lot of sort of almost like microorganisms, just the chemical compounds that make up yeast, all going to be there. If you start applying direct heat to the still, the actual temperature of the gas we're applying can go up to nearly 1,000 degrees Celsius or so. So what this means is that we can fundamentally encourage a whole range of Maillard reactions happening in the still with the sugars, with the yeast cells. So, the Maillard reaction is that breaking down of compounds. It's the reason that steak tastes good when it's cooked at a really high temperature on the outside. That is now being applied to what we're doing in the wash still. We are, hopefully, I'm sure, going to get a really interesting, more full-flavored new make spirit being produced because of this change of the heating source. We're not using direct heat for the second distillation because fundamentally, by the time we get to the second distillation, there will not be those unfermented sugars left in the liquid. There will not be the dead yeast cells left there. It would not have any purpose to do it on the second distillation. But for the first distillation, we now have the opportunity to create some really, really new, interesting flavors that hopefully, well, definitely will be reflected in the new make spirit that we're going to be producing going forward. Give that a few years in the cask, I think we're in for some very interesting and exciting times with Glen.
Yes, indeed. Well, I mean, it was already a very nice distillery to go and visit. But I think come 3-4 years time, it's going to be almost like a museum piece.
Yes,
somewhere where you can go and see all the processes going on.
Yep. But also, you're right. You'd be able to see this and almost look at it as this is how it used to be, a bit of a museum piece. But then also one of the other reasons, one of the other justifications for the direct heat, and I think this is possibly slightly surprising, the distillery will be reducing its carbon footprint by about 15% through using direct heat, because because we can capture so much of the excess heat now, the recycled heat. So there's huge new sort of water tank that will capture the heat, and this heat, this warm water, if you like, will be used to heat up the wort before it goes through the still, so that would be more efficient. We'll use it to help with the floor maltings. So yeah, we've sort of gone backwards to use direct heat, but actually we are making big steps forward as well. And more and more, as I'm sure you're aware, the questions about sustainability in the whiskey industry, peat usage, and they're really important questions.
Yeah.
Overall, I think the whiskey industry, generally speaking, is actually really rather good at sustainability. Fundamentally, let's face it, every cask that is used in Scotland is recycled. It's second-hand, if not third-hand. But things like this, I think, are really important as benchmarks, as a showcase for the whiskey industry to be able to say, this is the sort of change that we can make, while actually, producing even more liquid, but reducing a carbon footprint quite substantially.
No, you're absolutely right. It's good to hear that actually reintroducing historic processes is actually helping to reduce future carbon emissions. It's very commendable. Listen, we're close to the end of this recording, so I just wanted to nicely move on to your personal opinion of the global whiskey industry at large. And is there anything that really excites you or even concerns you in the current climate of whiskey making around the world?
So I think a little sip to embrace myself for that. It is really exciting, the world whiskey industry, and generally speaking, I'm hugely optimistic about what is happening. I love the fact that we see whiskey distilleries being built, popping up all over the world. Sweden producing amazing whiskey. Look what the Australians are doing. Virtually every European country and so many countries outside of Europe, the quality of the liquid coming out of India. So overall, I think this is still really exciting times for whiskey generally, and I think the quality of the liquid, generally speaking, is getting better and better and better. New distilleries are always going to have a challenge of they've got to get liquid out there to make some money, to enable them to lay down more stock, to keep the stock going for longer. So when it does get a good period of maturity on it, maybe it's going to be some really exciting liquid coming through then. We're going to have to maybe wait and see. There's always the slight risk that expediency means you have to get some liquid out on the market possibly before it's truly ready. But overall, this doesn't seem to be a huge issue to me. And even I've tasted some quite young whiskies coming out of some the English distilleries, and some of it's been so vibrant, so alive, such a wonderful, exciting liquid to drink that I am fundamentally hugely optimistic about the whiskey industry going forward. Downside, hopefully we're edging away from it, but what happened with tariffs being imposed, huge barriers to trade happening, was it 25% tariffs on Scotch whisky going to the States and bourbon tariffs the other way. This is concerning. This is things are better when we can drink whiskey from all around the world. Things are better when people from all around the world can drink our whiskey. Learn from each other, different traditions rub off on each other, different innovations rub off on each other. We need to be talking together, sharing whiskey together. Otherwise, the future will not be as wonderful as it should be. So that is my caveat, if you like, there, Eddie, that everything is not all roses in the garden, but I am at heart an optimist, and I see so many good things happening, so many people becoming more and more passionate about whiskey, loving it, wanting to find out more about it, so many different people discovering it, that I am going to go with my optimistic side. The Glencairn is definitely half full rather than half.
Well, that's good to hear. That's good to hear. Anyway, listen, David, I've kept you long enough for this session, so thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wit and wisdom and the Glengarry 12-year-old. I hope all the viewers at home have enjoyed it. Now go and do another session. David, look forward to seeing you when we finally can. But Slanjavar for now.
Eddie, Slanjavar, always a joy and a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure. Thank you, David. Take care. And take care, everyone at home.